One common fear that came up during the search would be death, and essentially that's to me that seems like the cornerstone of sort of the human dilemma. You could say is a fear of non-existence and a vulnerability and an attempt to protect something because there's a fear that I won't exist unless I keep myself going. So I'm trying to keep myself going in my search. I'm moving to the next moment and projecting myself into imaginary situations where I will actually exist as a real entity. Never noticing that this entity doesn't even exist in deep sleep. And oftentimes during the day, I, as an entity, was not there. For example, when I'm engaged in an activity or something like that. And often I would seek to get rid of myself. Tony Parsons says that the thing we long for and fear the most is our own absence. So this sort of dichotomy was the root problem. And it was held together by the belief that there was a real entity in the first place. And so death, the idea that I will die and I will not come back, and that this will be a terrible loss. I won't exist anymore. I'm dying. I'm not going to wake up. I'm going to go to sleep and not wake up. As a child, I was at a funeral, and I asked my mother, well, something like, what happened? Where'd he go? Well, he's dead. He went to sleep and he didn't wake up, or whatever explanation it was. And then as the child's intellect, it was, well, that could happen to me. I'm gonna die. I'm gonna die, aren't I, Mom? Well, not for a very long time. And then, oh, okay, not for a long time, but I am gonna die. And so this was the beginnings of it, this fear growing. See, I am gonna die, and that's in the background now. I'm gonna die, and it's a fear that gnaws in the back. It's like, I'm gonna die. I'm not gonna be around forever, but I'm gonna be around for a long time. So then, the long time became the focal point. So I have to make sure that I get myself in order. I have to get it right and try to survive as long as I can and get the most out of it. Suck all the pleasure out of life that I can and accomplish something great so that maybe I won't die. There's this sort of longing for immortality. Maybe if I do really well, I won't really die. Maybe I'll go on. And when I became religious, and there was the idea that I will continue, as an entity in an afterlife if I'm good here. So then I'll continue and continue more and more. And I'm guaranteed more time. But what I never noticed was all my activities were really an attempt to be rid of time and to dwell, you could say, in timelessness. So I became addicted to spiritual practices later on. Initially, I was addicted to narcotics. And the purpose of both these were to be free of you could say, the flow of time or the continuity of time, to sort of step out of time. And that became the addiction. But parallel to that was an imagined entity wanting to survive. So it became very exhausting. And what was never questioned was, well, is there an entity in the first place? Is there a self here at all? And that's when the non-duality pointers began to strike, began to hit home. Because there was a resonance with it that was beyond the doctrines that I had believed in before. You could say both mundane and spiritual ideas about how to live. And so non-duality started deconstructing that and blasting away the foundation of seeking, especially for states of enlightenment that I'd heard so much about. There's no such thing. This thing isn't enlightened. I'm not enlightened. There's no such thing as enlightenment because there's no one to obtain enlightenment or not. So it's a moot point. It has no relevance because there isn't anyone. And that pointer began to hit home. There is no one. There is no one. And that sounds very fanciful maybe, or threatening, or The mind doesn't know what to do with that because there's no mind to do anything with that. So, I heard people like Tony Parson say, there is no one. Or liberation is the realization that there is no one. And that seemed to strike a chord. There is no one. That doesn't mean that there's just a sort of a horrid emptiness. You could say the nature of this absence of someone is unconditional love, but it's not experienced by anyone. So the organism, you could say, it lives in unconditional love, but it's not for the seeker. So the seeker doesn't find anything because there isn't really a seeker. So it's a paradox, and it sounds very complicated. This whole thing sounds very heady and intellectual, and as an intellectual, it was difficult to sort of transcend the intellect, and I didn't transcend the intellect, but the intellect was seen through. But obviously, this is simple. It may not be obvious as a seeker, but when it's seen, the obviousness of the simplicity is evident, because it really is just about what is currently happening, and that's it. It's not about any type of additive or adding of concepts or even getting rid of concepts. It's seeing that all there is what's happening instead of an implied self and an implied other reality. So that means there's not really separation at any level. So it seems like there's a self here and a self there, and there's sort of a movement of me, other, but that's actually one thing somehow. And this can't be explained, but it's evident. You see children, you see a baby, and their eyes are wide open and they're gazing around, and there isn't that sense of I'm in here yet until it gets programmed into the brain. And that's really what it is. It's something that's so simple and childlike. Jesus talks about, you have to become like a little child to enter the kingdom. And that sounds, and then of course the mind will want to become like a little child. But see, this is already the case. You could say the nature of what we are is that already. So it's already, it's a done deal. It's fixed already. What is absolutely it, including the mind even. So really the only thing to look into is who feels separate. What is the self that feels separate and feels as though it's seeking? Where is it? What is the entity? Find it. Email it over if it's found, if you find it. That was what was encouraged here, and it was never found, ever. All that was ever found was thoughts and feelings arising. That's it. So, as a seeker, life appears or seems or is experienced to be happening to me. You could say liberation is simply life is happening. Period. That's it. So, life isn't happening to this body. That's the divine arrogance. That, this body is so important that life is happening to it. How do I deal with it? Liberation is the end of something that was never real. So it's not a grand state. It's not even a state at all. It's just the way things are. Things happen in, you could say, a blank awareness, rather than things happening to a fixed entity, a point, a contracted point of sort of awareness. So it's sort of like a clenched fist. The fist says, well, what happens to me? And then this hand is open and it says, well, what do you mean what happens to you? You are this already, and that's it. I don't know who used that metaphor, but it seemed appropriate. Anyway, thanks for watching, and feel free to email or not, because either way, this is it. Thank you.